If I could boil down my view of the future of the electricity industry, it really comes down to two words: decarbonize and decentralized. Or stated differently, it's going to be clean and it's going to be local. The decarbonization, as I guess Russ talked this morning about the pie, it's very much about cleaning up the electricity grid and then electrifying vehicles as part of the strategy. In terms of the decentralization part, I think what we're seeing is new technology is giving choice to consumers. And by new technology, I don't just mean hardware, I mean exactly what you folks are all doing. And there's also going to be, I think, a huge influx of third-party owners of assets, meaning rooftop solar and the like. And so distributed energy is going to be not just about having assets all over the place, but you're going to have a lot of distributed decision-making and distributed deployment of capital. And I think that's going to lead to some profound changes. The driver for this, obviously, Senate Bill 350, laid out clear and ambitious goals to move to a clean energy future. And it actually laid out 4 prongs associated with that, which I think we've all talked about at length. But I see SB 350 as really part of a long history of innovation in California, all the way from decoupling back in the 1980s through to today. California historically has led in terms of innovation and an innovative approach both to energy policy and to the regulatory environment. So, what could possibly go wrong? Well, we are proverbially changing the wheels and possibly changing the engine of the car while we're driving it. And we in California have got firsthand experience about what happens when things go wrong. Now, I think it's popular in history to blame evildoers like Enron and others for the energy crisis, but I think, frankly, it arose largely because of poorly thought out reforms, even though the Electricity Utility Industry Restructuring Act, AB 1890, passed unanimously in 1996. There were basic flaws, and then that was coupled with, I think, some colossal blunders by the regulators at the time. And so this led to a huge man-made disaster that I think has a shadow today. In fact, when I was appointed to the PUC, Governor Brown, as he was signing as a witness of my oath of office, he turned to me and said, "Don't screw it up." So trust me, that is on the forefront of regulators' minds. So, what could go wrong? What I'd like to do is quickly step through what I see as the 4 big challenges associated with this new future. First off, this is good news. As we move to a deeper penetration of renewables, I think Jeff said it earlier, there aren't that many that serve as baseload. They're all variable. So anywhere between 70 and 80% of our renewable future is going to be variable. And that's going to cause some problems. So there is what the portfolio looks like today. So following the load here. And in just a few years' time, 2030 projections of what it's going to look like. So you see as wind and solar come on, we'll need to back on and off natural gas in quite some extensive ways. So even with storage, we're going to have significant volatility and potential instability in the grid. I want to focus on one part of that. We've talked a little bit about curtailment. And on one level, I'm sympathetic with PUC Commissioner President Picker when he said, I don't want to hear about overgeneration as a problem because what's wrong with clean, cheap energy? Well, the problem is you have to throw it away if we're not careful. So projections are showing somewhere between 5 and 10% of renewable energy in total will need to be thrown away on a 20% frequency. So in order what that means is to get to 50% renewable, you'll need to build 58, 60% renewable. That's very expensive. And that curtailment is going to wreak havoc on the potential payback to investors particularly in solar. Second class of problem. Investments in grid assets is growing very rapidly. You can see here, although load growth over the last 10 years, it's a yellow line, is flat, the utilities across the state have doubled rate base in the last 10 years. And if you fast forward, projections are for that rate base to triple in the next 20 years in comparison to the investment that's taken place in the previous 20 years. So there's quite a lot of investments, and this is potentially very, very expensive. The third problem, managing a distributed base of resources is a very complex problem. It requires a lot of very complex handovers and systems and organizations talking to one another. And these problems could have potentially very difficult scaling issues. And then finally, the institutional environment in which we operate is disjointed and inflexible. The Little Hoover Commission and others have questioned whether the existing setup is really fit for purpose in a rapidly evolving market. In fact, apparently the Little Hoover Commission has been concerned about California's energy governance structure for almost 40 years now. But again, very, very complicated handovers. And even if you focus on one organization, PUC, not to pick on them, but it's a complex maze to navigate. If you are interested in the issue about resource planning, you need to follow 37 different proceedings. Now, the good news is the Commission recognizes this and is unifying it together in the integrated resource planning, but these 37 proceedings are not going away. So I've listed all the things that could possibly go wrong. I want to balance that with a series of solutions. And as a former banker, the good news is the liabilities on the left-hand side are fewer than the assets on the right-hand side. So we have more solutions than we have problems, which is good news. It's in my contract as a member of the ISO to show the duck curve at any presentation. So there it is. This actually is a snapshot from January 25th. So the duck curve exists today. So this is the actual, I could have used one from a couple of days ago. But what's interesting about the duck curve is the price analog to that, which is also published by the ISO. And it's what I call the bat wing curve, because it looks kind of like a bat to me. But these are hourly prices, the day-ahead market. And you can see the analog to the generation of wind and solar is substantial reduction in energy prices during the course of the day. In fact, prices can be zero or even negative for substantial parts of the day during certain times of the year. So this is actually a big opportunity. When you're talking about anywhere from $40 to $50 a megawatt hour of potential value, that sets up a lot of arbitrage value. Problem, of course, is these price differentials may not provide a long-term investment signal, although they're becoming pretty persistent, and not all customers react economically. We talked about time of use rates. Here's a depiction of what they may look like. Again, during periods of high generation, we may have super off-peak rates, and then have super peak rates during the midday ramp. Second solution, expanding energy efficiency and demand response, basically shifting the load dynamically. And I think this is one of the key ways of flattening out that duck chart is by moving load. I think automation is going to be a very key part of making this a reality. Third solution, what I'll call interconnection. The EIM has already created something in the region of $45 million in benefits over the 13 months it's been operating. But the EIM is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of benefits. It really only focuses on surplus in the 5 to 15 minute markets. There's substantially greater value. It may be 8 to 10 times as much value from coordinating the day ahead markets and coordinating resource planning. So there's potentially huge benefits from this. Of course, there are a lot of difficulties. We're working very hard to try to understand what that future world looks like and satisfy all the various constituents who have a view on this. Often said that storage is a game changer. The question is, what game are you playing? And here, I stole this from the Rocky Mountain Institute, a great paper on the different values. They identify some 13 different values that storage can provide. And the thing is that oftentimes the same resource if it's designed to solve only one of these problems, it'll sit idle for substantial parts of its life. And so if we can figure out ways to pay for these different values, then although costs are going to continue to come down, we could substantially improve the economics of storage by having ways to pay for the value it could provide in other circumstances. And that's one of the things that we've been focusing on at the ISO. There's an initiative which has been running, well, since before I joined, to allow access into the wholesale markets by aggregators who pull together different resources from the distribution side. And this, I think, is, in a sense, we're kind of forcing the pace here. There are many issues that will need to be worked out in terms of things like double payment and resource contention and coordination and so on. But I think this is going to be the way of the future and the way to really get us to where we need to go. Electric vehicles. Again, as I think Jeff mentioned, Angelina mentioned, described this program here. I mean, EVs are really a triple win, because not only are they part of the greenhouse gas reduction by substituting and switching away from fossil fuels, they also can absorb the overgeneration problem, and they can provide grid services if they're properly networked and connected. And so I think this is a very significant role. Again, my hat's off to Sonoma and their work here. I think this is truly path-breaking, and it's the sort of thing that CCAs can do and can jump on in a way that, quite frankly, the investor-owned utilities don't seem to be able to. Lyndon Rive was here earlier today from Solar City. I think this is again another very exciting development. They recently published a paper on how to use distributed resources as a grid asset and as a substitute for traditional investment that utilities might make. And I think what's interesting about the paper, the concept isn't necessarily new. There was a project in Brooklyn, Queens, that deferred $1 billion investment that Con Ed wanted to do on a substation by putting together a demand response and batteries. But what Solar City did in their paper is they estimated the value in California, something in the region of $1.4 billion by 2020. They also disassembled PG&E's rate case and looked specifically at areas where a distributed energy resource-centric solution could be substantially cheaper than the investment that was being proposed. And then finally, they talked about creating incentives for utilities to invest not just in the hard assets, the traditional ones, but invest in services and get compensated and generate greater returns, potentially greater returns to their shareholders as a result of investing in distributed or investing or buying services from distributed assets. So how might the electricity industry evolve? Well, I think there's been a lot of brain power has gone into this issue. A lot of ink has been spilled around it. But I think it's very clear that the traditional vertically integrated utility is rapidly becoming disassembled, and there are going to be new and very exciting business models and business opportunities, including for folks here in the room, to play new roles. And I think key to this is going to be addressing some of the both public and private institutional issues that we have. I've listed a whole bunch of them here. This is something that it's not unique to California. I mentioned New York earlier. They've taken a slightly more theoretical approach in their reforming the energy vision proposal. But we have grid modernization efforts and thinking around how to change the institutions and the process going on really across the country. But I will say here in California, there's a very strong desire amongst the main agencies to work together. Doesn't always get translated down through the levels of staff, but I think we're continuing to look at ways in which we can smooth the path and to accelerate the changes that are coming. I will say I am, quite frankly, I am concerned about the Public Utilities Commission and the resources there and their bandwidth. As a former commissioner, it is at times an impossibly difficult job to do, and I think the agency is chronically under-resourced, and I do think that some of the reform efforts that are being proposed are a little misguided. But there's a substantial role here for local communities and local governments and local CCAs to get involved in and at the end of the day, the real question is what's in the best interest of customers in terms of providing safe, reliable, affordable, and environmentally sustainable electricity. So with that, I'd like to close. I'll say I'm extremely confident and very optimistic for the future. Seeing the amount of energy and enthusiasm in this room is very, very heartening. In my mind, there's no better place on the planet than in California. I agree with Angelina. We are an example that we can, as we work through some of these issues, we can become really a guide star for the rest of the world. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm very interested in what's going on and ways in which I can help move things forward. Thank you very much.